Leadership has become one of the most misused words in modern relationships, because today, leadership is often spoken about as if it's a solo performance, while everything else in the relationship remains conveniently undefined. Listen carefully to how leadership is framed. The man must lead. He must protect. He must provide. He must regulate emotion. He must anticipate problems before they exist. Not according to reality, but according to an idealized blueprint that only ever seems to apply to him. And here's the quiet problem no one wants to say out loud. Leadership is being demanded without any obligation to respond to it. The issue isn't that men are expected to carry structure. Structure is masculine. That part actually makes sense. The issue is that structure only works when something responds to it, and that half of the equation keeps quietly disappearing. Now notice how her role is usually described. Not with duties, not with standards, not with anything you could actually audit. Instead, it's dressed up in aesthetic language. Feminine energy, being the peace, inspiring him, creating a vibe. It sounds beautiful until you realize none of it has a job description. These terms aren't just vague, they're strategically vague, because what can't be defined can't be measured, and what can't be measured can't be held accountable. So here's the imbalance. The man is expected to operate in concrete reality, decisions, outcomes, responsibility, while the woman operates in emotional abstraction, feelings, energy, interpretation. One side is solid, the other is fluid. And when things go wrong, guess which side gets blamed? This is where leadership becomes a convenient escape hatch. If she's combative, it's because he didn't lead well enough. If she's uncooperative, it's because he didn't create enough safety. If she behaves poorly, it gets reframed as a performance review for him. Leadership turns into a catch-all explanation that allows her to avoid examining her own behavior. Now, to be clear, balance matters here. Yes, there are situations where leadership is genuinely poor, and poor leadership can absolutely damage trust and responsiveness. That's real, and that shouldn't be ignored. But here's where the conversation gets dishonest. Because the existence of bad leadership does not mean all resistance is justified. And it certainly doesn't mean a lack of responsiveness automatically proves leadership was flawed. In many cases, leadership is clear, consistent, and grounded, and responsiveness is still absent. Yet instead of examining that, the narrative shifts. Context gets removed. Goalposts get moved. And suddenly, leadership is blamed simply because it's the only variable allowed to be questioned. That's not analysis. That's narrative control. Imagine a coach who designs the system, sets the structure, and calls the plays. But the players ignore instructions, argue constantly, and refuse discipline. The team loses, and the players say, well, if he were a real leader, we would have listened. That argument doesn't work anywhere else in life. Why would it work here? Modern dating quietly sells this idea that leadership should somehow override personality, that masculine direction should neutralize emotional resistance, that a man is responsible not just for outcomes, but for how a woman chooses to behave inside the system. That's not leadership. That's being held liable for someone else's choices. Every functioning system runs on two things: structure and responsiveness. Leadership without responsiveness collapses. Responsiveness without leadership drifts. Pretending leadership alone determines outcomes isn't empowerment. It's selective accountability. Here's where men need to listen differently. Don't just hear what she says about men. Listen very carefully to what she says about herself. If she has a detailed list of what a man must be, but struggles to define what she's accountable for, that's information. If her contribution lives in moods instead of behavior, vibes instead of effort, feelings instead of follow-through, she's not confused. She's informing you. Think about an employee who says, I want strong leadership, I want guidance, I want direction. But the moment expectations are set, they resist. They personalize feedback. They bend rules. That's not a leadership failure. That's a receptiveness problem. One of the most common reframes sounds like this: if I'm acting this way, it's because you didn't lead properly. It's subtle, but powerful. Responsibility gets relocated. Leadership turns into a shield, and she never has to change. Balanced femininity doesn't just admire masculinity, it cooperates with it. It can articulate its role. It understands accountability. It doesn't hide behind abstraction. True feminine energy doesn't resist structure. It doesn't blur responsibility. It doesn't outsource accountability. It responds. The move for men here isn't to debate, not to explain, not to educate. It's to observe. If accountability is vague, if responsibility is flexible, if leadership is demanded but never supported, you're not being asked to lead. You're being asked to carry imbalance. And imbalance isn't something you fix. It's something you exit. Leadership isn't magic. It doesn't override character. And it doesn't excuse resistance. A woman who genuinely respects masculinity won't just ask for it. She'll align herself responsibly within it. Because leadership only works when someone is willing to respond. And any system that asks one side to carry everything while the other carries nothing isn't a relationship. It's a liability.